Welcome in. You're listening to Mount Hermeneutics, where three Marines talk about God, faith, and spirituality with a heavy lean on the Divine Council Worldview. Now, this is not your grandma's Sunday school, nor is it always for the faint of heart. There's nothing about who we are or what we say that make us experts, but you better believe that we're going to have a take, and perhaps it won't suck. So with that, fellas, what's cracking? What's up?
Hey, Dre.
It's been a wild week for all of us. We're a day late because we've all got lots of stuff going on. Brian's been living like a Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, and
Yeah,
I've been in San Antonio and all about and got stuff going on with family and friends being ill and a lot going on. Life's real.
Yeah, I'm not nearly as serious as you guys. Like, I had to put on a 3-year-old's birthday party at the beach. And if you know anything about one Delani, and shout out to Longtime Sun Events. Check that out, Longtime Sun Events on Instagram. We basically created what's it called? Rainforest Cafe at the beach. Right? So we were able to put up a big backdrop, and we had wild animals all over the place, and a bunch of little kids running around and singing.
were there a lot of Lunchables there?
Actually, we were short on the charcuterie. We did the usual pasta salad, potato salad, mac and cheese. We did chicken tendies in the air fryer and brought them down.
Raisins or no raisins in the potato salad?
We don't do any raisins here. Yeah, there's none of that.
Hey,
I would veto that immediately. So, I don't know. Maybe I had an offended look on my face, but I definitely did.
I could tell you didn't.
Like raisins, and it's weird. As I get older, I don't actually hate raisins like by themselves.
Just not the potato salad.
I'll always say raisins.
There's places that raisins don't belong, right? And I'm a raisin all alone guy.
Raisins are just ruined grapes.
I mean,
okay.
Yeah, that's what they are.
That's like saying that dolphins are just gay sharks.
I don't think that's the same thing.
No, I don't think that's the same thing. Not at all. But I did hear it on Glee, so it must be true.
All right. Well,
so we mentioned in the open that we lean on the Divine Council Worldview. So I think for this episode we're going to go ahead and talk about that, huh? The DCW.
Yeah.
So Brian, I'll direct this question to you. What is that? What is
the Divine Council Worldview?
Divine Council Worldview, yes.
Well, gosh, how do you? I knew you were going to ask me that, and I'm still trying to figure out where to jump in. I guess the best part is there's this weird little passage in Genesis 6 that we tend to gloss over. It reads, in those days men began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them. And the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took of them as wives any of whom they chose. The Lord God said, my spirit will not strive with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. Now the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God went into the daughters of men and had offspring by them. These were the warriors of old, the men of renown. And then the Lord God saw that the wickedness of man was great, and the thoughts of his heart were only evil all the time. And that's when he decided to flood the earth. And then the Noah's Ark story happens, but it's just this weird little episode. And we tend to read the book of Genesis, really kind of the whole Bible, but the book of Genesis especially, as this sort of pastiche of unrelated stories. Like, we all remember going to Sunday school as kids, and that you'd kind of get these standalone stories, and they wouldn't really explain how they fit into the broader narrative, because in their defense, a lot of them didn't know how stories like that did fit into the broader narrative. But actually, it turns out it is a whole big narrative, and that event was kind of a major issue. That's what precipitated the flood, led to the corruption of the earth. And then after the flood, Noah comes out of the ark. God makes his covenant with him not to flood the earth again. And the human race is repopulated. And then they all decide to gather to build the Tower of Babel so that they're not spread out on the earth. And God doesn't like this. And he comes down and he confuses their language and scatters them. And that's also kind of seen as just another weird little standalone story, but it's directly related to the first event. And I tried, and as we were discussing, I was going to explain this without referring to the Book of Enoch, but it actually, and I don't want to get into a big discussion about what the Book of Enoch is, but anybody who's interested can look into it. And
can I pause you right there? So you said a lot so far, and a lot of things this kind of flow, and it kind of sounds like you're almost rehashing Genesis after the creation and going forward. But it's called the Divine Council Worldview.
Yeah, let's get into that.
So what about this, or what about those stories, or those passages that lead to something being called a divine council, and what does that mean?
Well, in short, instead of God ruling the world directly, it's ruled over by a divine council, a council of divine beings to whom God has delegated the rulership of earth. And they're called watchers in the Bible. They're only mentioned by name in the book of in Daniel chapter 10, and you kind of see glimpses of this. But the book of Enoch expands on the Genesis 6 event. And the reason this isn't very well known is because the Book of Enoch was largely unknown to the West until the late 19th, early 20th century. And even then, it was only known to a few collectors and academics. But even they didn't know what its significance was until the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and there were entire copies of the Book of Enoch, and they started studying it more. And academia now understands that not the Book of Enoch necessarily itself, but the background that it provides about the Genesis 6 event. This loomed huge in the thinking of the Jews throughout biblical history, and especially the New Testament writers, and particularly Jesus. And once you get that background, you can't unsee it. But basically, in Genesis 6, as the Book of Enoch expands, these beings called the Watchers, 200 of them descended on Mount Hermon, which is a sacred mountain in north. It borders Syria and Lebanon. It's kind of a major landmark in the Holy Land. But the 200 of the Watchers descended on Mount Hermon, and their leader was a being called Shemihaza, whose name means the face of the name, and that ties into the Hebrew where they call the Nephilim the men of renown. It's kind of the same connotations, and it ties into the Tower of Babel, where they decided to they did this to make a name for themselves. So there's some definite connective tissue there. But these Watchers swore a pact to engage in this act of rebellion by sexual relations with human women, knowing it was rebellion. Shemihaza didn't want to be the only guy doing it and the only guy taking the heat, so they all swore a pact to do it. And then they fathered the Nephilim, and in their mingling with humanity, they gave all of this forbidden knowledge of warfare and magic and seduction and metallurgy and weapons making and all kinds of stuff that led to the corruption of the earth. Meanwhile, the Nephilim were just kind of running rampant all over the earth and wreaking havoc everywhere they went.
Hey Brian, let me cut in for just a second.
Sure.
I like where you're going, but I'm worried that Dre took a chance to redirect you, and I don't think it quite redirected. Let me jump in on a point here and see if I can help out. So when we talk about the divine counsel, and to be really clear, I want to upfront make sure as we're talking through this, and we're going to reference DCW a lot. We did this in our pilot episode, but that may get lost in the ether. A lot of this was brought forward by Dr. Michael Heiser. and his studies specifically, he coined the phrase Divine Counsel Worldview. So I want to do one thing I want to do is make sure that we openly give him credit both from a bibliography and a terming point of view. I don't want anybody to accuse us of just stealing his information and trying to present it as new information. In fact, I'm holding the first book of his right now, The Unseen Realm. Not his first book, but the first book I read of him. And I've got quite a few pages dog-eared and notes in here. So I wanted to talk about that. But the first key for me, at least, and Genesis 6 was the start of it as well. And we can kind of talk about when we first read it and kind of what made us kind of go, wait, what?
There's the two main books right there.
But the big thing is there is usage of a word Elohim that's very, very prevalent throughout the Bible. And Elohim can both be a plural and a singular. And one has to have the literary understanding. And I don't possess it, by the way. I'm taking the word of experts that have written on this and that are PhD linguists and ancient studies. But you have to understand the use of the word to know if it means plural or singular, and that's relevant because there's
it's just
many
like in
times
English with fish or sheep or.
Sure.
Like it's not an uncommon thing,
right.
but it's
absolutely. Sure. But it's super relevant in this specific instance because Elohim means supernatural being. Okay, and I'm going to be very simplistic here and try not to use overly scholarly sounding words. One, because I'm not sure I understand it that clearly, but just to be really clear, and I'm going to make an analogy for all of the drinkers out there that are listening in. God is an Elohim, but not all Elohim are God, right? So as we talk about Elohim, what we're really talking about are angels, demons, God, etc. And it's simply a dividing line in the way that the ancient Israelites talked about what were humans, mortal humans, and what were not mortal humans and lived in an alternate plane. So I don't think anybody here that's listening or anybody on this in this conversation has a contrary opinion that angels exist or that demons exist or that God exists. Obviously, if you're remotely Christian or of a Christian spiritual leaning, that's not a new idea. The difference is that the early Jewish people didn't have a differentiation between angels and demons. They didn't really get into a good angel or a bad demon. They were simply Elohim. So Elohim just means a thing that exists in a plane beyond normal mortal people. So the reason I say that, give me 1 second, Brian.
Being.
Yeah, spirit being. And I'm going to jump to I'm going to grab a verse just for reference. Job 38, 4-7. So in the book of Job, God is talking, okay, and this is God's voice. This is Yahweh's voice. And he says, "Where were you at my laying the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you possess understanding. Who determined its measurement? Yes, you do know. Or who stretched the measuring line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars were singing together and all the sons of God shouted for joy." Now, I think that's a really important verse because the verse that Brian mentioned, Genesis 6, the sons of God saw the daughters of men. That interpretation has drawn a lot of attention. There's the pro DCW folks out there, and there's anti DCW folks out there. And the anti DCW folks, and Brian can probably do a better job than I can of explaining what their thought process is, but they tend to try to round the corners of the sons of God, and they try to imply this is just the sanctified Sethites or the sons of Abel, right? That these are just the holy people that God has chosen. That's very inconsistent because everywhere in the Bible when it talks about the sons of God, much like this verse, I'm pretty sure that God's not implying that the Sethites were around to watch the earth created and shouted for joy, right? Like it's pretty clear those were angels that were saying, "Hey, good job, God," right? So like the words matter, and
Yeah, I was gonna.
No, I just wanted to kind of make sure we were bringing that to a little bit of a tighter point before you went on to give it more body.
Well, I was going to just kind of lay out what the worldview is, and then we could kind of address questions of why isn't this well known, and then the Sethite interpretation is what you're talking about, which kind of became the thing. in the centuries after the advent of Christianity. But that's a kind of a different story. I just wanted to lay out what it is first. But
so really what we're talking about is that there is another plane. There are spirit creatures, and God kind of did his work with them, not with them just standing around and just being in awe, right?
Right.
Even because I think one of the first passages that really caught my attention as I'm investigating churches was basically the creation story, and how it starts off with, let us go make these things, and then they make people, and then it jumps to a sequel that it talks about making people in God's image right after that. So in my mind, I'm like, why are there two creation stories that are back to back, and what are we missing in that spot? And I think that the DCW or this worldview has kind of helped me reconcile those first and early chapters of Genesis. That's just kind of my initial take on it. And then as Genesis progresses, and then we start getting into Tower of Babel, and then Job, and then what is it? How it in Psalms 82, and then how it kind of connects with Deuteronomy 32 and Daniel 10 and Kings 22. Like all these things, all of a sudden it starts making sense to me that they're not just separate stories that I learned in Sunday school, but they're actually a long narrative, and that narrative is actually woven together and not as disjointed as I learned it.
Right. So,
what about this information that the three of us decided that we wanted to talk about this, so much so that we would actually name our podcast after elements of this thing?
Well, I'm not sure we've adequately explained what it is yet, though.
Well, that's okay. We've got time to still do that, yeah. But I'm not sure that. I mean, we could probably spend hours describing adequately what it is, but what about it is?
Like, give me like another 3 minutes, and I can I'll run
Please.
It out. So
go ahead.
So you have this episode in Genesis 6 where the Watchers descend, leads to the corruption of man, the Nephilim, all that stuff, corrupts the earth, God floods it. Later on in the Tower of Babel, a lot of times, like, Christians typically read that as that they were trying to build a way for humans to get up to heaven.
Good point.
That is totally wrong. It's actually the opposite. Most scholars understand the Tower of Babel to have been a ziggurat. Some even identify it with a specific ziggurat, the ziggurat of Etemenanke, which is dedicated to Marduk. A ziggurat is a man-made sacred mountain. And mountains were understood to be sacred places because they're kind of a meeting point between heaven and earth. That's why the Watchers descended on Mount Hermon. So in building this ziggurat, they were basically humanity collectively was trying to reinstate the arrangement of Mount Hermon. Like in the Garden of Eden and on Mount Hermon, Genesis 6, this was divine beings seducing and corrupting humanity. The Tower of Babel was humanity first off rejecting God's command first to Adam, then reiterated to Noah to multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Instead, they wanted to be gathered into one place, but also rejecting worship of God and seeking the favor of these lesser gods. They wanted the Nephilim to come down so they can make a name for themselves like the Nephilim. They wanted that could be interpreted reasonably to mean they wanted to father more Nephilim, and also they wanted that forbidden knowledge that they'd heard about from their ancestors. And when you read the Book of Enoch and all of this material, alongside a lot of the material that's been discovered in the ancient Near East, like the Enuma Elish and stuff about the Anunnaki, they had this belief in these divine beings called Apkallus, who, if there's, I won't bore you with all the etymological technicalities, but it essentially means watchers. There were these, they celebrated these beings as having descended to give them this forbidden knowledge, and the Babylonians attributed their success as an empire to the knowledge given to them by these beings. So what the Babylonians celebrated as a source of enlightenment, the Jews condemned as a source of corruption. But the understanding from the Tower of Babel was that because they did this, God disinherited humanity and said, hey, if you want to follow after these lesser gods, have at it. And he put them, he made the Watchers, not the same Watchers who had descended on Mount Hermon. They had been locked up in the abyss. And there are some weird parallels there with Greek mythology, with the Olympian gods overthrowing the Titans and casting them into Tartarus. But we could have a whole other conversation about all of those parallels. But basically, God gave humanity over to the rule of these lesser gods. But the very next thing he did was he called Abram, who he would name Abraham, to make a nation of his own out of him. And you see this summed up in Deuteronomy 32, which you reference, where he talks about how the nations were divided according to the number of the sons of Israel. I'm sorry. Some translations have it as the sons of Israel. The Masoretic text has the sons of Israel. The earlier Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint have it as according to the number of the sons of God. The Hebrew is Beni Elohim. And these same beings are referred to alternately as Beni Elohim, which means sons of God, or Elohim, which means the gods. But Jacob he has set apart as his own portion. And so basically the plan, beginning with Genesis 12, was to redeem humanity back to himself through his chosen people, eventually through the Messiah. And then you see this reference in Psalm 82 where God addresses the divine council, the council of gods, and condemns them for their corruption and tells them they're going to die like mortals because they've corrupted mortals. And then the rest of the Bible is basically this conflict between these gods to whom humanity had been entrusted, but who became corrupt themselves and led to further corrupt humanity. And with that background, and there's some merit to the Sethite interpretation that you mentioned. Genesis 6 follows after Genesis 4 and 5, obviously. Genesis 4 gives us the genealogy of Cain and all his descendants and what they did. And then Genesis 5 gives us the genealogy of Seth, who are that's the chosen seed. And so it's understandable why in isolation somebody might interpret Genesis 6 to be a continuation of those two, to be referring to those two groups. But taken in the context of the entire Bible and the verses you mentioned about the sons of God being their creation, it doesn't make sense of the rest of the Bible in anything close to what the Divine Council Worldview does. And in fact, there's so much about the Bible that we tend to just sort of gloss over until we understand the Divine Council Worldview, and then all of a sudden it explodes and it makes sense.
Well, I think that was some of the linkage that Dre was mentioning, right? About things start to make sense. And let me do a little high level of kind of what Brian said. So Genesis 6, Watchers came down. They saw human daughters. They had Nephilim. God was unhappy. He flooded the earth. Jumped to the Tower of Babel. Mankind under Nimrod was trying to recreate Mount Hermon ostensibly, right? By trying to build this tower. God was unhappy with that. He scattered mankind. And then it's in the text, it says that he scattered mankind to as many nations as the numbers of the sons of God, right? So basically he cast the rest of humanity into the hands of the other Elohim, and then he took his people back and created Israel. That's kind of the super high level of it. And then Psalms 82, which again, Dr. Heiser, I said I wanted to be really fair to him. He references Psalms 82 as his aha verse, right? That he had read the Bible and had been taught, to the point that Brian made. He was learning from the Masoretic text for the most part. He was learning kind of this alternative translation or interpretation of some of these books. And then when he hit Psalms 82, he couldn't reconcile that with how he understood the Bible up until this point. And that's that discussion about God stands in the divine assembly and addresses the gods. That's essentially what Psalms 82 verse 1 says. And that's where the terming of the Divine Council Worldview comes from, as I understand it from Dr. Heiser, is that specific verse and the fact that God was standing in this divine assembly addressing other gods, other Elohim, lowercase g gods, right? That's where this concept of this divine council kind of arose from, and hence the coining of the terminology and the way of looking at this. I just want to be really clear, both Dr. Heiser, probably over 100 times in one of his books, let alone all of his other videos that he did in his interviews, this is not suggesting that Christianity is in any way, shape, or form a polyistic.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah,
like, okay, so
100% not.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
Does that mean that we should be polytheistic? Is there a pantheon of gods?
No.
Are we pagan? What are we saying?
Exactly right.
All these gods?
And it's funny that you ask the question that way, because I've talked to some of my friends here, here in town, and had these conversations. I've been kind of uncovering this over the past couple of years, and I saw that the sideways heads and the squinty eyes as people are trying to hear my point of view and go, where are you going with this, Matt? Like, it sounds like you're going down this pagan pantheon kind of idea, and it's not that. It's really no different. I mean, if you think about, and I'm going to take a little liberty, I'm not Catholic, but I've known Catholics, I've talked to Catholics. Catholics are very comfortable talking about all of these angels and their impacts and effects and the things that they do, and they even can't, they believe that saints turn into angels when they're sainted and that kind of thing. And
they got jobs,
right? They got things to do. Everybody's got a job, right? You've got, Michael's got a job, and Gabriel's got a job, and Satan has a job. We'll get into that later. Put a little pin in that conversation point. But that doesn't change. What we're saying is no different than the idea that these angels have jobs. We're simply suggesting that they had some type of a, managerial input point with God as this was being created. You go back to Genesis, what was it? Genesis 1:3 or 1:4, when the creation is happening and God says, "Let us make them like us." Right?
Let us make man in our image.
In our image.
God, he made them.
And then it says, then God made them in his image, but he's having a conversation with the Elohim. He goes, "Hey, let's make men like us."
That is Michael Heiser's interpretation. It's one of his more controversial takes.
Well, let's talk about the alternative version, that the Godhead is having a conversation with itself.
Well, himself. Some people take that as supportive of the Trinity. Yeah.
Right. Because all throughout the Bible, the Holy Spirit and God talk. That happens constantly throughout the Bible, right? That's heavy sarcasm for those that can't see my face.
Well, there are verses where the angel of Yahweh refers to Yahweh in the third person, or Yahweh is speaking to Moses and refers to his angel, the angel of Yahweh, in the third person. So I don't know that idea is so ridiculous. I'm not dogmatic on either one. I don't accept it because Michael Heiser interprets it that way. That's necessarily what it means.
No, that's entirely fair.
I think he makes good arguments, but I'm not fully persuaded that it's necessarily that as opposed to the other. But I'm not fully convinced of the other either.
I think. To cut you off.
I do. To your earlier point, though.
Go ahead.
I think we're all trying to emphasize that the Elohim that we're talking about, plural, these are created beings. Like back to what you said.
Sure.
That's pretty much the answer I was looking for when I asked the question. I was kind of trying to pull that little piece. Like, hey, just like we are created in his image, that doesn't mean we're his only project, right? So there's clearly things that were before us.
Well, and the reason I mean you were trying to bring that point out, but people do hear that and they automatically, people hear about the Divine Council Worldview. So many times I've explained this and people have been like, what are you, Mormon?
Right.
And well, no.
As a matter of fact, I'm an honorary Mormon. So
yeah. But
I want to shift gears a little bit, and so we talk about all the things that went wrong, right, and all the things that why God flooded the earth, why He disinherited His nation. We didn't mention the fall, but there was the fall. What was the purpose before? How was it supposed to be if all these bad things didn't happen? What are we trying to get back to?
Well, I think all of the textual clues. This is a controversial take, but this is something I am dogmatic on, and I would defend to the death.
I like that you said both. This is controversial, and I'm also dogmatic on it.
Yeah. So
Love
it. I know I'm going to be the odd man out on some things, at least as far as people listening to us. But I will make the case for this till I'm blue in the face, or until I hear a good argument to the contrary, which I never have. I've always just heard people, it conflicts with their theological system, so they reject it. But the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Here we go.
This is probably the most misinterpreted passage in all of human literature. That people call it the tree of knowledge, and as if knowledge itself is corrupting, or they argue that God planned for them to eat it, like that's what He wanted because He was trying to bring about, it was predestined or preordained to happen. No, I think it was the fruit of a very specific kind of knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil. They got the knowledge of good and evil by doing the evil. With it came the knowledge of good and evil. It's a package deal. I think the option was also available to them, which God and frankly I would have preferred. They learned the knowledge of good and evil by doing the good, by not eating it. I think had they not eaten it, they would have become like God, knowing good and evil, and humanity would have been fully enlightened without the past sad, blood-soaked story of human history. But we were supposed to be God's image bearers on earth, and we were supposed to turn the entire world into this Edenic paradise. We were supposed to fill the earth and subdue it, beginning with the Garden of Eden, because Adam ate the fruit. He learned the shame of having done evil.
Wait, I got to interject, because Eve ate the fruit and then tricked Adam into eating it.
Did she trick him?
I mean, that's my take, and I'm sticking with that.
Well, it just says she took the fruit and gave it to him, and he knew what he had done wrong.
What was the trick?
I'm just convinced that Eve tricked Adam into doing it. Eve did it first.
Do you have a reason for thinking he was tricked rather than just wanting to go along with?
Well, it was the same. It was the same trick that the serpent played on Eve, right?
Oh, okay.
Clearly, the whole conversation was, you will die if you eat this, and then surely you won't die, and then somehow that battle of the wits won out, and Eve ate it, and then she didn't die. So then when she went to Adam and said, "I ate it,"
though?
That's
and I
did the serpent trick her?
Maybe. Sorry, go ahead.
I kind of think of it as if, because we're talking about the knowledge of good and evil. If the goal was to be God's image and work your way to being godlike, it seems like they took a shortcut. It was almost like this is a faster path to being like God. So I don't think that's a trick. I think that was hey, you can do it and learn all the experiences and do all these things, or you can eat this piece of fruit and be like God, because you surely won't die. Not today anyway, right?
Well, I think the thing that, and maybe this will bring us some agreement here, by clarifying the conflict there that the serpent raised was, it was about whether they would trust God. The serpent said, has God really said this? Well, yet no. He do not touch any fruit in the garden. So he made God sound more restrictive than he was, and Eve corrected him. No, he said we can't touch this. We can't eat this fruit. For if we touch of it, we will die. Which is still not quite what God commanded. She was making God more restrictive, which maybe Adam told her that just to be on the safe side. Don't touch it, instead of just don't eat it. Because the command was don't eat it. They could have plucked it. They could have played soccer with it. They could have done anything they wanted with it, as long as they didn't eat it. But then the serpent says, well, you will not surely die, for when you eat of it, you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Which was true. They did become like God, knowing good and evil by doing that. But I don't think it was a matter of wanting to take a shortcut instead of hard work. It's that they didn't trust God. They believed God. They trusted the serpent, that God was holding out on them. But had they trusted God over the serpent and not eaten the fruit, they would have gotten there just as fast, but by doing the good.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, that's I don't know that I agree or disagree. There's not enough information in the actual text, right, to form around. I mean, I get where you're making the assumptive leaps. I get it. I don't know that I disagree with it, but I mean, we don't really know what God said, because he doesn't say it. It doesn't say it doesn't tell us what God said.
It does.
No, it doesn't. I'm looking at it right here. So verse 3. So verse 2 ends, and God hasn't given them an order about the tree.
Are you looking in Genesis 2?
Yeah. There's no mention of the tree of life in Genesis 2.
Genesis 2:8. Now the Lord God had planted a tree in. Hold on.
It simply mentions it and it moves on.
Hold on. Now the Lord God had planted a garden in the east in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. The Lord God made all kinds of trees.
Oh, I'm sorry. Verse 17. Sorry.
Trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then, right, but you must not eat from the tree of knowledge. So we have God's command right there.
Yeah, and he says, you shall surely die. Yeah.
And so what we know from that is that, what we know from the text itself is that they did obtain the knowledge of good and evil by eating the fruit.
Right.
But by doing the evil, in other words. It was, what if they had done the good?
Well, I mean, that's very open-ended interpretation, right? I mean, you could also, it's Schrodinger's tree, right? Schrodinger's fruit. It's both good and evil. It's only evil when you eat it, and it's good if you don't. Like,
yeah, if it's being put to you to eat the fruit, and you tell the serpent, no, God said this, and you tell me this, I'm going to trust what God said because I love him and believe he has my best interest at heart. Unlike what you're saying, you're telling me he's holding out on me. He's trying to withhold this good thing that I want. I'm going to trust him that if he says not to do it, that's what's best. And then, and just to reiterate, man is God. Adam had been made in God's image. He was God's ruler over all of creation. So he had the authority in that situation. He could have told the serpent, hey, get lost, you're lying. I don't believe you. How dare you insult the character of our creator?
And I think Adam would have, but we got Eve to think for this.
Well,
but he still didn't.
Because Eve had already done it.
Okay, so why couldn't Adam?
What's he gonna do at that point? He's like, well, I mean, Eve ate it, and she's not dead yet.
He could have not eaten it.
He could have.
I mean, should have.
He still committed the same sin of distrusting God, and that's and really the rest of the biblical narrative hinges on that singular point. Mm-hmm. Do you or don't you trust God? Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Israel's sin in the wilderness was not,
except for all that part with his slave.
What do you mean?
Ishmael.
Well, yeah. I mean, Abraham wasn't perfect. He tried to.
Right. I guess I'm being flip with the point that Adam and Eve they committed one transgression against one rule. Then we have biblical identities like David and Abraham and all these other guys they made mistakes and they were allowed to make up for them. It's just it's interesting that this one was the first one and there was no like do-over or second choice or anything like that for those individuals. And then all of humanity paid for that one single mistake.
We're not paying for that single mistake. We're paying for our own mistakes, but we inherit his nature.
Well, we inherited the fall. The fall. We start from the fall.
Right, but we have to make a distinction between inheriting Adam's fallen nature and inheriting Adam's actual guilt. We're not held responsible for what Adam did, but we did inherit a fallen nature, and that's why we live in a world where we need locks on doors and laws that say don't murder and steal.
Okay, so let's little thought experiment. Would Cain have killed Abel had they still been in Eden?
No.
Right. Would the Watchers have taken daughters of man if we were still in Eden?
No.
Right. So my point is everything that you're just talking about is simply a derivative of the fall, period. I'll stop. It's all because of the fall. Our days are numbered because of the fall.
Yeah, but that's not the end of the story.
No, agreed. We have a way back, but that doesn't, to your point, you made a very dramatic statement about all the bloodshed of what has been the history of humanity is all because of that one event.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's just I'm not passing judgment on it. I'm just saying it's just an interesting point in the entire biblical story that David was so flawed, right? Sinned and sinned and sinned and sinned.
And he paid for it.
Right, but he still was able to recover for it. And all of humanity doesn't suffer because of David.
Well, yeah, but all of humanity isn't represented by David. But David's family was, the story about Bathsheba, how he had Naaman the Syrian killed.
Mm-hmm.
Nathan the prophet came to him and told him the parable about the lamb, and then David was outraged and said he has to pay fourfold for what he did. And then then Nathan said, "You're the man," and then 4 of David's sons died. So he paid fourfold for his sin, and then he lost the kingdom in the second generation. But,
right. I'm with you on all of that. I just to me that they're not equal. There's not even close to another equal derivative of a bad decision than there is relative to Adam and the tree.
It sounded like you were saying like God is unfair for.
No, I was just pointing out an interesting point. Like I said, I'm not passing judgment on the divine. I'm saying it's just interesting. That's all.
Okay. Well, that's
surely not passing judgment on God.
We've been violently agreeing these past few minutes.
Yeah, I was just pointing something out, and you're like fighting with me, and I'm like, well, look, I'm not backing off my point. It's still an odd, disproportionate thing, but I mean, I'm sure there's purpose behind it.
I wouldn't, but the disproportionate is the thing I'm pushing back on.
How many people have existed on planet Earth since Adam and Eve?
Well, and there's a.
Dre just cut his eyes like he was trying to do the math in his head real quick. He was like, I mean.
Well, I think a reasonable discussion could be had, and I'm probably going to get rocks thrown at me by not necessarily you guys, but someone out there is going to go pick out a rock for my head. But I think a worthwhile debate could be had about whether Adam is an individual historical person or an archetype. I think there had to have been a first behaviorally modern man, and I would call that person Adam.
Yeah.
But Adam in Hebrew just means man, and so it within the text itself, it could be taken as an archetype to represent all of humanity.
No, I think I agree with you broadly. I mean, I think the story of Adam and Eve, their existence and where they existed, actually aligns with anthropological studies of the evolution of the Homo sapien, right? There were other, I don't know what the right term is when I say homos. It's not what I mean in the slang parlance, but Homo erectus and Homo.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
There was 8 or 9 different hominids, right?
I still need to read this. It's the Genealogical Adam and Eve: The Surprising Science of Universal Ancestry by S. Joshua Swamidass. But yeah,
I think that the God creating Adam and Eve could be as simple as could be as easily understood as the first version of a evolved Homo sapien. And then that doesn't mean that there weren't others that evolved at other times and other places, because we could segue over to the conversation around where did Cain go when he was cast out of the garden.
Yeah. Well, and if we look at what an interesting, sorry, Dre's chomping at the bit to say something, and
no, I'm just saying, like we're going down a big deep Adam and Eve rabbit hole when we're kind of a divine council worldview.
Are you saying this has nothing to do with the divine council?
I'm not going to say it has nothing to do. I'm just saying it's one aspect. And I think that was the point that Brian made earlier when we were trying to describe what this is that each aspect in and of itself is pretty detailed and nuanced. And
yeah, that's fair.
I think, well, I was going to make a point about just the drive-by. If you look at how anthropologists define anatomically modern humans versus behaviorally modern humans, and look at how the Bible defines Adam having been made in the image of God, the distinguishing characteristic that anthropologists make is the capacity for abstract symbolic thought and communication, i.e. language.
Sure. Well, and Dre, that was the conversation we were having about the belief in a fictional concept like government or organization and that kind of thing.
It's not a fictional concept, but it's a linguistically constructed concept.
It's just the language that this guy used. He used the term fiction, right? So as we're talking about giving people credit, right? So the book Sapiens.
Is that the World Economic Forum guy?
Yuval Noah Harari. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that
he might be.
Yeah.
Well, because the first at the top, it's Bill Gates giving him his review, so it probably is a World Economic Forum guy.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, there's civilization, right? And the crescent of civilization was right there in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia. Mm-hmm. So it kind of falls in line, right?
The phrase abracadabra. It's Aramaic. It means as I speak, I create. It's believed by some to have originated with ancient Kabbalists before Kabbalah was called Kabbalah. But the point of it is that Adam was being made in God's image. He was participating with God in creation by naming the animals, and it's this power of language that gives us our creative powers. And it's interesting to me that you find that in the book of Genesis and in ancient Jewish mystics, and then modern anthropology catches up with that. But to the Divine Council Worldview, though, I think the New Testament, under the New Covenant, I mean, I always thought the Great Commission was kind of, I didn't understand what the big deal was. Like, I understood it was Jesus ascending to the right hand of the Father, but when he says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. I always kind of thought, like, well, if God is already running the show, why is that a big deal? Well, the Divine Council Worldview frames that in a way that it explains that all of the other nations, they're under the dominion of these other gods.
Yeah, he took them back.
Yeah.
He said, now I'm back. And this is
right.
Right. So remember that thing that Yahweh did back when you idiots were building your ziggurat? Well, we've moved on past that now, and it's time to bring everybody back under singular
Right.
control.
But like Jesus has all the authority, and it's not just that Jesus is in control of the nations, but humanity has taken back the nations through Jesus. Paul says that we are. He's speaking in the present tense. We are seated with him in the heavenlies. Like we are ruling with Christ as members of the church. We're heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. And when he talks about how the creation waits in eager expectation for the sons of God to be revealed, he's talking about humanity in Christ replacing the gods on the divine council.
There's been a change of the board. The board seats have been changed out.
You're leaning out.
You're fired.
I lean out.
And you're fired.
But
and you're fired.
Yeah, but where it talks about how we're going to judge angels, that's what it's referring to. But it's to open another can of worms. The popular version of Christianity has it that it's about if you believe in Jesus, when you die, you go to heaven instead of hell as a disembodied spirit or soul. It's really not talking about that at all. It's talking about immortality in this world, restored and renewed to its intended Edenic state. So it's really a different narrative than what we're told. It's kind of a different religion.
And to be clear, when you're saying that what we're told, you're talking about what we're told by modern Christian teachers versus what we're told in the book. Just being clear. I know what you mean, but I'm saying that for any listeners, because when we're talking about what we're told, sometimes we're referencing the word versus people. But yeah, I think we've the three of us have had this conversation a lot that the average person, I think we might have said it in a previous episode, but just for the new listeners, the biggest challenge with viewing things through this DCW perspective or this lens, even going back to we talked about Genesis 1, and Brian and I disagreed a little bit on maybe what it means, what it doesn't mean. The reality is the perspective or the read that I presented is impossible without a Divine Counsel Worldview as you're reading the text, right? And whether or not the interpretation's right, you can't get there any other way, because otherwise you look at it and go, the heck? And you just kind of move on because you're like, this doesn't make any sense. I'm just going to move on. Don't know if he's talking to himself or what, so I'm just going to ignore it and move along smartly, kind of thing. And that's for me, I think that's always.
I'm just going to move on to the nativity scene.
The easy stuff, right? And where the songs come in, and deep and wide, and whatever. But that's always been a problem for me. Even as a kid, I've always been kind of I don't want to give myself the credit and say I'm a critical thinker, but I like to ask why. So whatever that means about me, right? But that's a tough place to be in when you're being taught about Christianity as a 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old, right? The wonderful women that teach Sunday school aren't really built to handle whys from a theological why from a 10-year-old. Right? It's tough, and I'm trying to be as generous and gracious to all of the ladies that are out there teaching. My wife does it. My wife teaches Sunday school for like 5 and 6-year-olds, and she's woefully unprepared to have a theological argument about why. Right? She's given information to try to help along and get these kids started on their theological journey. It's a tough job, and I know Brian and I have had this direct conversation that the problem is that very few people continue to evolve their theological view after 12, 15-ish, right? We pretty much learn our things. Dre, you made that comment about Sunday school and the happy songs and the easy verses, and then we're done. And then most people stop going to church in their 20s. They go to college, they get too cool and too smart for God. And then at some point they grow up and they come back to church, but they're past their why stage of life.
Hey, Matt, if you're going to lean the other direction.
Am I falling out of frame?
You keep, yeah.
I can't lean that way, dude. My gangster lean only goes one way.
Well, then move your. I guess we're gonna have to talk to your shoulder then.
I don't know. I can't tell where the center of my screen is. My screen's so wide in my box
So I guess that the last couple minutes that we've been talking, we're kind of leaning toward what does it mean? Like why are we doing this?
Why does this matter?
Speaking, why does that even matter? I mean, if the only thing that matters about your salvation is faith in Jesus Christ, what is all this other stuff? And why do we do it?
Well, I think faith in him for what is a good follow-up question, and a lot of the answers you get from that is would be to go to heaven when we die. That's not in there. It's
or what do we believe about him, right? Like, do we only believe that he died and rose for our sins?
Well, yeah, and that kind of goes back to the Garden of Eden question. The whole thing hinged on do they trust him? Are they willing to obey him? Are they willing to do what he says because they believe he has their best interests at heart, because their best interests are in following him? It wasn't a question of what they believed about God. It's about whether they trusted him personally, his character. Like when Abraham said, when it said about Abraham, he believed God and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Well, God's existence was not in question for Abraham. He had seen him. He'd spoken with him directly. Same with the Israelites in the wilderness. But we tend to construe faith as a matter of what you believe, less than in whom do you believe. Like if I say, Dre, I have faith in you, obviously I'm not saying I believe you exist despite there being no evidence. It means I believe the best about you. It means I believe your promises. I believe you'll do what you say you're going to do. So when we say we trust in Jesus Christ, when we believe in him, it means we take up his cause. Well, what is that? Well, he's taking back the nations. He has authority over the nations now, but he doesn't have their obedience. And that's the thing. That's what the church is supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be. We are the body of Christ. We're the temple of God on earth. We are supposed to be his vessel and an agent for bringing back the nations, and that's what we see the apostles do. But
do we as individual Christians have a different commission than, say, the church?
No, as individual Christians, we are the church.
When you say the church, what do you mean, Joe? You mean the Roman Catholic Church, or do you mean what do you mean?
I just mean a community of Christians, the church, religion, the theology. What is it? Does it have a different role than what we do as individuals? I think the answer is no, it doesn't, because we are it.
Right? Yeah. Wherever two or more are gathered in my name, there am I with them.
Right. So a lot of people.
I made that. I threw that. I was going to say I threw that where my church is remodeling and renovating a building, right? So on Saturday, I got asked with a group of the men go up and tear down ceiling panels and whatnot, right? So we made this big mess. We worked for like 2-4 hours. It's hot, sweaty work, right? I looked at my pastor and I recited that verse. I said, that wherever two or more of us are, there's the church. Like, why are we doing all of this?
That's right.
I was like, bruh.
It's going on.
But we're so preoccupied with this idea of individual salvation. And we talk about spiritual warfare in church, but it's always very abstract. If you unpackage what they mean, it usually just means something like overcoming negative emotions or overcoming temptation, which isn't entirely wrong, but it kind of misses the big picture. We actually are at war with the spiritual forces of darkness in the heavenly realms. Those are when Paul mentions that it's not against flesh and blood that you struggle, but against the rulers, the powers, the spiritual forces of darkness in the heavenly realms. He's talking about the divine council that has gone corrupt, and we are in a war with them. And the entire point of the Bible is that when that war is over, Jesus returns and they're overthrown and destroyed. So their objective is to bide as much time as possible to keep us distracted and indolent and ineffective as long as possible, because as long as they do that, they get a stay of execution.
They get to exist. But if they're these heavenly beings or these different realm unseen beings, surely they're intelligent, right? Why would they think they could win this in the first place? What was their goal? What are they struggling with?
Well, but that's the thing. They don't think they can win. Like, the outcome is determined. They know they are doomed. They know that they are going to lose. So but they can hold that off indefinitely.
But when did they know they were going to lose? Why start this endeavor?
That's a fair.
Psalm
That's
82.
an interesting question.
I think Psalm
Right.
82.
So
That's fair.
okay.
Well, but Psalms 82 happened before the initial round of Watchers were cast into the pit, right?
Are you sure?
I ended that with a question mark. I said, didn't they?
Right. Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say so. I would say he's addressing in Psalm 82, he's addressing the Watchers to whom he gave humanity over at the Tower of Babel.
Right, which happened well after Genesis
The
6.
flood, right?
That was my point.
Right.
So Genesis 6 happens.
I'm sorry. Right.
The Watchers from Genesis 6 that made the Nephilim
Right.
daddies,
Right.
they were cast into the pit.
Right.
So my point is, it wasn't those Watchers that were being talked to in,
Right. I'm sorry. I
in Psalms
misunderstood.
82. There you
I
go.
thought
Okay.
you were saying Psalm 82 was before they were thrown into the pit.
Yeah, the first round, the first chunk.
Well,
Yeah.
No, Psalm 82 was after they were thrown into the pit.
Correct.
So
So
but
So they wouldn't be in the
And it's just-
boardroom, is my point. They were in the
Right.
they were in the boiler room.
yeah, and that's kind of why the stories about the gods of Olympus overthrowing the Titans and the Titans being locked up in Tartarus,
Mm-hmm.
like, it's got these weird parallels.
Absolutely.
To, like, now the gods to whom God has disinherited humanity and delegated our rule, they're claiming they've enticed humans away from worshiping God to worshiping them. That's the gods of Olympus. But
So I'm asking. So did the Elohim think that they won after God said, "Okay, fine, I've disinherited"? So they're like, "Cool, we win. These are now our people."
I don't
Because
think
why
they-
would you continue this? Why would you say, "Whoa, no, I think I'll rule them the way you want to," which would make no reason for God to chastise them in Psalms 82, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we can only speculate because we don't.
Yeah,
have
I can't get in the
information.
head of a demon, right? I can't.
But
I don't recommend
or an
it.
Elohim.
I don't recommend it.
Right.
I mean, for all we know, it happened by gradual degrees. Like, they made compromises here and there, and then before you knew it, they were demanding worship. But what an interesting point! I was, since you asked, and this is a convenient time to go back to it. So he flooded the earth to rid the earth of Nephilim, and to wash the world clean of the corruption of the Mount Hermon Watchers. But then later on, when they're conquering the Promised Land, like the whole book of Joshua is about ridding the Promised Land of these beings called the Rephaim. They're sometimes called the Anakim, the sons of Anak. Anak was one of these Rephaim, these giants who are basically Nephilim, and they're set in their time, which raises the question of, well, if God flooded the earth to get rid of them, why are they showing up again?
Yeah.
Did the flood fail?
Well, it says in
Well,
Genesis. It says in Genesis, and they existed after.
Well, the Nephilim were on the earth and also afterwards, but
Right.
It doesn't say afterwards of what. It just says
It makes
after
it sound like
those-
after the story I'm about to tell you.
Well, you could read it that way, but if the
You
point
have
of
to
the
read
flood-
it that way because they did exist later in the Bible, though.
Well, but hold on. And Heiser gets into this, and I can't remember if it's Reversing Herman or the Unseen Realm. I wrote him a question. Here's what I think, and this is another thing where I'm pretty sure this is the explanation. I wrote him to ask him, and I never got a response, and unfortunately he's passed away, and so I guess I never will. But
If you do, let me know.
Never.
Well, I won't need to ask him by that point. At that point, but so the Tower of Babel, they were trying to reinstate the arrangement of Mount Hermon, right? A ziggurat is a man-made sacred mountain to receive gods from the heavens, so they'll come down and commune with humanity. When Moses and the Israelites kill Og, king of Bashan, Bashan is this realm in north of Israel. It's supposed to be this kind of demonic place, this gate to the underworld, and it describes his iron bed, and it happens to be it's this huge bed that Marduk was attributed to. Not Marduk, King Og of Bashan. Heiser points out that the bed is the same dimensions as the sacred bed of Marduk, which was atop the ziggurat of Edamanaki. So why do you have a bed on top of a temple?
Mm-hmm. To make Nephilim?
Right. And a lot of ancient Near Eastern religion revolved around sex. Like you had Baal and Asherah worship throughout the Old Testament, and they talk about shrine prostitutes. The thinking of the ancient Near East was that when it would rain, pagans understood gods to be basically personified forces of nature.
Right.
Like Zeus is like, if it's a bright sunny day out and then some clouds rolled in, well, that's Zeus exerting his dominance over Apollo. Mm-hmm. And if you go out to sea and there's a hurricane wipes out your fleet, well, you must have pissed Poseidon off and you should have offered sacrifice before you left. Everything that happens in nature is a god expressing their displeasure or their favor or whatever. So that's what pagan worship was, placating the gods. So when they worship Baal, when their understanding of rain was that this was Baal, the storm god, having sex with Ishtar, the earth goddess, and the rain was the seed that fertilized the crops. And so if there was a drought, well, then they needed to get him in the mood. And so you had all of this, you had all this ritual set. It's basically live porn shows.
So the Yin Yang twins are pagans, and with their
what?
Hugh Hefner had to hey, listen, they brought in Larry Flint to save the day.
Well, if they were trying to end a drought, I guess that might have been the reasoning. But nice. the point, this is just one example of how a lot of pagan worship, especially in the ancient Near East, it revolved around sex. There was this sort of sympathetic magic sometimes. In that instance, sometimes it was actual priestesses being, awaiting the descent of the god on the top of the ziggurat for Marduk to come down and ravish her. And given the fact, I don't know this, I've been trying to research it to get more evidence to the effect, but my understanding of it, based on the fact that the Tower of Babel was an attempt to reinstate that, so much of their worship revolved around ritual sex and sex with gods and sex between gods and mortals. New Nephilim are showing up. The dots seem to connect, that they repeated the behaviors that occurred in Genesis 6, and that's where the new Rephaim came from. And so, because it seems like if God fled to the earth to get rid of them, he wouldn't have failed. It might have been that. Back to your question about, well, what are the Watchers thinking? Why would they rebel again? Maybe humans enticed them, but for all we know,
you're blaming the priestesses for how they dressed.
I'm slut shaming.
You're victim shaming. Yeah, you're priest shaming, priestess shaming.
But are they victims?
I'm not sure they're the victim though. I think the poor. The poor.
Now it's the poor Elohim.
I mean,
Is that what we're doing? Is that what we're doing? Did we just really?
Look down at the daughters of men. It was I've had the same problem.
I'm not saying I do it, but I understand.
It's like God.
I get it.
It's like God leaving humanity to babysitters.
The
babysitters sleep with the kids.
Right.
It's kind of that literally.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to make.
No, it is. I see what you're saying. Yeah. No. It does make sense. But I think that a big takeaway from this, and I mean, we could kind of spin on this for a while, but one of the takeaways that I like from this overall, call it theology, point of view, perspective, is one of supreme um, uh, self-control, self-agency, and free will, right? I mean, clearly there's free will of abundance. The Elohim had free will, humans have free will, Nephilim have free will, right? It's definitely not, there's very little in this way of thinking that I can see personally that aligns to one of predetermination or predestination. It's just, that's kind of my simple takeaway.
Our choices have stakes, and they matter.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of has this might be a whole other podcast, but it's certainly relevant to Jesus told the apostles, speaking to the broader church, what you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, what you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout the Old Testament, you see these scenes playing out in heaven where the sons of God are coming before God and deciding the fates of humanity based on who's guilty, what accusations can Satan bring to state his claim on humanity. And if humans were sinful, well, then he had a claim. Like, and you see your like First Kings, is it Second Kings 22, where the prophet tells King Ahab and the other guy, I wish I had it in front of me, but I think you know the verse the verse I'm talking about, where the sons of God came before God and the Divine Council, and one of them said, "What should I do to King Ahab?" And well, the Lord asked, "What should we do to King Ahab?" And one of them said, "I'll send a lying spirit to lead him into battle." And that's just a glimpse of this happening. But basically, humans are like these pieces on a board that they're moving. But it is largely a function of what we deserve and what we've brought up upon ourselves by our behaviors and our choices. But in the new covenant, if we're seated with Christ in the heavenlies, we're not pieces on a board anymore. We're players. The things that we do as the church, it matters.
Mm-hmm.
And one example of this, and then I think this is going to be controversial, especially if you're Catholic. Do we want to offend Catholics this early on?
I think in all seriousness, we should probably, I meant to talk about this in a pre-production meeting, but I think it would make a lot of sense if we were to be delicate with all denominations writ large, at least within the actual Christianity umbrella. What Muslims we might be a little more loose and free with, but it probably makes sense to be a little kid glove with how we address some of these things. Now, obviously, I took a little bit of a shot at predestination, but that wasn't. I don't know
that's
that
Calvinists.
was.
They got it. Calvinists have it coming.
They don't count.
I don't know. I think we'll use 10-ounce gloves. You know, not 4-ounce gloves.
I mean, 10-ounce gloves. They still hurt.
They sting. That's right. So I think that's kind of the point of what we're doing. Things are going to hurt. This is not your grandma's Sunday school. Okay. Things are going to be a little weird, a little bit different. If people are offended,
I was more concerned with pacing than with offending.
But Dre, finish your thought.
I'm just saying, hey, if it gets a little dicey, then so be it. But I think that we've stated it up front that we come with a sincere heart, and we also have a comment section, right? So if anybody disputes, because we're not experts, and maybe we have or say something that's out of turn or not correct, and I'm okay being corrected by it, right? But I don't
I guess my thing is there's a difference in going at a concept, which is very different than going at an entire group of people.
Well, okay.
I would agree.
Right. So like I took my shot at predetermination, but I didn't name Calvinists as an example, right? So I didn't say, hey, all you Calvinists, you freaking idiots. There's no such thing as predestination,
well,
right?
Let me just make the point. I wasn't going to attack Catholicism directly, but just by implication.
Yeah, I think if the shoe fits, that's different. I think that's fair game. Yeah, I think so.
So here's one of the reasons.
Because you're going to get attacked.
Sure. Here's one of the ways that the Divine Counsel Worldview should apply to. It gives us an overview of history, a way to understand the meaning of history and of church history in particular. And to illustrate my point, so a couple of observations. First, you have Jesus being tempted in the wilderness by the devil. The devil takes him to a high place, shows him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor, and says, "These have been given to me, and I can give them to whoever I please. If I will give them to you if you bow down and worship me." And then Jesus said, "It is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only." But the thing, first off, that is the Divine Counsel Worldview there. The kingdoms of the world had been given to the devil. Jesus' mission was about winning them back. That's what the Great Commission was. But what I think was happening there was the devil was offering him, well, you should raise up you should lead an army and overthrow the Roman Empire, set up a Jewish empire in its place. Then you can have all the kingdoms of the world. That would have been effectively worshiping the devil by imposing the gospel by force, because by definition it can't be imposed by force. It's salvation by grace through faith, not by the works of the law. Law is a matter of government. It's imposed on you by a government. You're coerced by threat of force to comply with it. And so for the first 4 centuries of its existence, Christianity spread by persuading people of its merits, often against what the law said, often at great personal cost. All of the coercion was on the other side, but people became Christians knowing the price they paid because they believed in it, because because it's a matter of personal conviction, and it has to be voluntary. When the church merged with the Roman state in the 4th century, and then Christianity became coercive, a lot of historians characterize that as the final stage of the Christianization of Rome. I say it's the opposite. It was the Romanization of Christianity. It was the church giving in to the temptation that Jesus rejected of all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor if we will bow down and worship him. It's the church taking up the sword so they can impose something called Christianity by force, and then 1,000 years of darkness ensued. But I think if we read that according to the Divine Counsel Worldview and understand it in terms of what we bind on earth will be bound in heaven, what we loose on earth will be loose in heaven, well, now, because the church had bent the knee to the devil by accepting violence as a legitimate tool of advancing God's kingdom, well, now the violence is fair game. Now he has the right before God as a member of the Divine Council to create his own rival religion that spreads by violence. I think the church merging with the Roman state in the 4th century loosed the way for the devil to speak to Muhammad and create Islam.
I could tell you were going there.
I can see all the signs like, hey, exit 22,
now,
Hollywood, Islam country.
And by the way, I say that solely on the principle. I'm not saying anything else about Islam other than something that they would fully agree with. It is coercive. There's no distinction between church and state in Islam. It's a political system as much as it is a religion. It says that there has to be a human ruler imposing the will of Islam of Allah by force, and they believe this is right. All I'm doing is pointing out that is antithetical to what we find in the Bible, to the New Covenant, to what Jesus modeled and taught. but it also happens to be the way the Roman Catholic Church existed for thousands of years, or for about 1,000 years until the Reformation. I mean, go ahead.
Which anti-Christians will quickly point out, right? Like, you speak of this peace and love, yet for all these centuries, you force Christianity with the tip of the sword.
Yeah, and that's another illustration of how we're locked in a cosmic war, and the enemy's objective is to keep us derailed and distracted as long as possible, to buy as much time. And as long as he does that, he's effectively he can hold off his sentence indefinitely by doing that. But
so do you think that we're losing this war?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we are.
Is there optimism to turn this war around?
Well, I would say based on everything we can see, we're all the signs say that we're standing at the doorstep of another 1,000 years of darkness. But we follow a Messiah who we claim to believe in, and follow a Messiah who walks on water and raises the dead and calls us to do the same. So I would say that turning it around is impossible, but that's irrelevant, because we should, if we're not trying to do the impossible, if we're not doing the impossible, if we're not doing the impossible, we can't really claim to have faith. If a church that is faithful,
you make the Great Commission sound like the Kobayashi Maru.
Well, it is, except we're Captain Kirk. We can
break it, and we can
cheat.
Yeah.
We can rewrite the code.
It's actually, but our Messiah has won the right to rewrite the code. That's the thing. But my point is that a church that's faithful, that's doing our job, cannot lose. We have got the power of God Himself. Even though it looks dire, it looks like all hope is lost. It is not. We just have to decide to do it. We could end the war within our lifetimes if enough people start turning back and abandoning this.
I swear you just described the Matrix storyline.
Yeah, maybe I was subconsciously channeling some Morpheus. But to be fair, they got most of that.
The Matrix is semi-inspired.
Right.
Well,
boy, the writers would be pissed, wouldn't they?
You're right. Well, I mean, Andrew Tate says we're in the Matrix right now. So.
I use that scene at the end of the first one where he hangs up the phone and he looks up and he flies. I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. Mm-hmm. That's a perfect illustration of what the resurrection is in history.
Breaking the laws of physics.
Well, showing that the world they believe exists around them, there's a larger world beyond it. Mm-hmm. There are things that transcend this world. That's the only explanation for what's happening, and that's what the resurrection is supposed to be. But yeah, that's. I feel like there's so much more we could have said about the Divine Council Worldview, and I'm thinking if there's any other.
We'll have to come back around to it. There's a lot. Right?
DCW, clear as mud. So.
It's not that it's unclear. It's just that it's so the Bible is so vast and sprawling, and it also.
No, it's clear. It's clear to you, but explaining it and pulling, millennia of tradition off of somebody's eyes.
Well, you guys have seen that graphic, right? With all of the books of the Bible and the verses and all the interconnections, and it looks like a freaking, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's like there's like 400 lines going back and forth.
It looks like a chart of like subatomic material phenomena or something.
Fellas, if we could explain this in 2 hours, then we would have no need for a podcast. So clearly,
are you suggesting we're dragging our feet on purpose?
No, I'm suggesting there's that much material. I'm suggesting that it seems like Brian's disappointed that he didn't.
Oh, I agree.
He didn't pitch this thing.
I think
he acquitted himself really well. and we just have a lot more to cover, with a lot more topics and a lot more examples and a lot more things to press against other worldviews that we have before us.
Or in a complete and total opposition to that concept, I could just quote Einstein and say, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it that well.
Well, I mean, maybe we don't understand it enough to really, teach others yet.
To counter that though, could Einstein explain relativity to general audiences with ease?
I think he could.
I don't think he ever did once.
I don't know he was ever asked to.
There's a famous quote. Well, sure he was. He was.
What are you talking about? Like,
he went on lecture tours. But somebody.
We still don't know what the F he's talking
about. I feel like, well, anyway, let me make 2 more points about this, and they're quick and they're more like teasers for future podcasts.
Does it involve Shazam?
No, but dang it.
Okay, well,
don't seed him with more. Okay, now I got to make 3 quick points.
No
Shazam, no Star Wars, the original trilogy, no.
No, what's your 2 points, man?
Okay, a lot of people.
2 points.
A lot of the objections that typically come up to this is, well, why how could the church have been chugging along for 2,000 years, and this is only now coming up? Fair question. Like, there's this saying that if it's new in theology, it's wrong, which is technically true, but what people usually mean is if it's not already in my tradition, then I'm automatically going to reject it. I can understand if Catholics say that, because they believe that their Catholicism has been constant for 2,000 years. No Protestant has any business saying that, because Protestantism has only been around for 500 years, and it's always in flux. So if you think that the Protestant Reformation was legitimate, that the church had been in existence as it was for 1,000 years, and then all of a sudden Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses, and now we're not going to listen to the Pope or worship Mary or ask for the intercession of saints and all that stuff, well, then you should be open to other things that need to be changed as well. And technically it isn't new in theology. This is a return to what Christianity was. And if it's true that we're in a war with spiritual forces of darkness, we should expect that they want to throw us for a loop. They want to distract us and deceive us. And we were warned by Jesus and the apostles that many false Christs and false prophets will come, and they will deceive many. They will, in 2 Peter, he said, they will exploit you with stories they made up. The literal wording is they will make a business out of you with plastic words. And of course, there's the broad gate and the narrow road that Jesus talked about. So just if you think that you're safe and you're right because you're in the largest herd, you're not listening to Jesus. That's one point I wanted to make. Another point.
There's another point. Go ahead.
If you watch like the Netflix show, this is going to sound like it's coming out of left field, but here, you guys know where I'm going with this. If you watch the Netflix series Ancient Apocalypse, Graham Hancock, to my best knowledge, is not a Christian. He's not out to prove the Bible or prove Christianity. But watch that series and what he uncovers about ancient civilizations. You kind of have this same story showing up all over the world. You have these divine beings coming down to mingle with humans, a divine wrath that wipes them out in a flood, and then there's some megalithic monument built afterwards as a ward against it. But like the way that you see the Bible paralleled with the Apkalus in Babylonian mythology, you have kind of the same parallel all over the world. And so whether you're a Christian or not, whether you believe us or believe Dr. Heiser or believe in the Divine Council Worldview or not, you have this same story. Aliens, I think, are Nephilim, but they're like they.
I I love that you said that.
Joshua didn't put him on. What's that?
I love that you said that. But, go ahead, finish your point. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I think aliens are Elohim, but
okay. Well, that's another discussion. But
I wonder if we can get that guy on our show.
I think we're on the verge of humanity is on the verge of a major paradigm shift in terms of our understanding of our own story and the history from before the end of the last ice age. I mean, humanity has been in existence for 50,000 years, or behaviorally modern humans have been in existence for 50,000 years. We only have like the last 4,000 years of written history and everything we assume about what happened
4,000 a little much. We don't.
I'm including like cuneiform from Mesopotamia, where they just recorded like how many bushels of wheat they grew that season and stuff like that. But historians and anthropologists are able to infer quite a lot from what little is written down. So
but inferring is a scientific way of saying guessing.
Well, it's educated guesses, but I see your point, and you're kind of reinforcing my point. You might be overstating from what I would put it, but we have this little sliver of what we know about history from what humans have been writing down, and then there's about another like 46,000 years before that we know that behaviorally modern humans have existed, and we assume they were all just sort of walking along, being primitive hunter-gatherers using stone tools. But with the discovery of Göbekli Tepe, a lot of these other ancient monuments that Graham Hancock brings to light, all of the evidence is pointing toward a civilization that was far more advanced than we realize, and a whole story there. And
there's all the Mayan stuff and the Proto-Mayan stuff that goes back a good, to that, and it's all, they're all somewhat in the same kind of era, right? I don't know if the
Mayan, Mayan step pyramids, they're only superficially different
from the ones at Giza and whatnot.
From ziggurats. Like they're temples. They're man-made.
Well, I was going to say they're more ziggurat than like say the Egyptian pyramids.
Well, yeah, the Egyptian pyramids are not. They're kind of a different kind than Mesoamerican pyramids. Mesoamerican pyramids are much more akin to ancient Near Eastern ziggurats in form and in function.
Right.
It's a peak where the god is supposed to descend so they can worship it and commune with it, and if you look into all that with medieval angels, there's a whole conversation there. But the point is
more than one.
But this is just a glimpse into this whole world that has yet to be explored, and
we haven't even said the word Atlantis yet.
And I haven't even mentioned John Dee yet.
Right.
So this is the point of what it is that we're doing.
Yeah.
And, I think there's a lot of research that myself, will just force me to do more reading, ways to dispute. I think that we have an opportunity to get guests from different theologies to give their view on what we're saying.
To include non-religious atheist type views, right?
Correct. That's what I'm thinking too. Or even like these Far East religions, or like a Kundalini structure, right? So,
a what?
Kundalini is a
Hindu mysticism
spot, right?
Oh,
it's like a yoga.
Okay. It's like
Namaste.
Like, chi and ki, and it's like stuff like that. Right. But they got that from Kundalini.
And Delani just heard that right now, and she's
her ears perked up somewhere. Oh, because you referenced it improperly.
Yeah, what are you doing?
That's not what we do. We do it like this. We chant, then we do the yoga. No, we don't do the yoga and then the chanting. What's wrong with you?
Right, in the music and the brain waves and the opening of the third eye.
But that does that does bring me to a third brief point I want to make. It's going to be incomplete. It's going to be a tease, but I think it's the most important thing here. I think we're preoccupied. We're overly preoccupied with individual salvation, but individual salvation is important to this. But we've kind of missed what that means within the Divine Council Worldview. Acts chapter 2, the day of Pentecost, this is a parallel and an antithesis to the Tower of Babel incident and to Mount Hermon. It's divine nature descending and intermingling with human nature to corrupt humanity. Acts chapter 2, it's divine nature descending to redeem us. And what we read about it, our individual salvation is about participation in the divine nature, and Kundalini kind of plays into that. It's a Far Eastern kind of. It's a parallel to that, in a lot the same way that the Tower of Babel in Genesis 6 is. It's an attempt to participate in divine natures, but Christianity is a mystic religion, and we're meant to understand our own salvation as the antithesis and answer to, like, we're basically what the Nephilim were to the spiritual forces of darkness. We are supposed to be for the kingdom of God. Like we're like good side Nephilim.
I don't know that let me so I'm trying to I've been hearing that a lot. Not you, but other people in other conversation groups. I
have not heard that. This is a new concept.
Yeah, so I struggle with the precept that Nephilim were inherently evil, with evil being, demonic, satanic, the dark side. That seems like too much of a stretch.
Why?
Because they were unnaturally derived. I get that. But so is anything that's produced from sin behavior.
Well, it's not.
So I mean, that's to say that a bastard. Hang on. Let me finish my thought, because I want to try to be as complete in what I'm saying. To me, the Nephilim are no more evil by design than is a bastard child being born out of wedlock.
Okay.
I mean, the child didn't ask for it. Two, it's the events around the conception of the child don't predestine that child to be quote unquote bad.
They don't. It's not preordained as a matter of inevitability, but there is a reason that bastard is an insult. If you're a bastard, no, you didn't choose that, but your upbringing. If you're a bastard, your parents aren't married, obviously. You're probably not being raised by your father. You're probably being raised by a mother who is struggling,
a single
to
mom,
provide
right,
for you.
Yeah,
and
you're cut off from the family wealth and the family things.
But that's an argument of nature versus nurture, right?
That's exactly what I'm saying, Dre.
But the point I'm getting to, though, is that bastards are the stereotype attached to bastards, and stereotypes are often based on observed patterns. They grow up and they wind up being, well, bastards in the insulting sense.
No, but again, that's a nature nurture thing.
Did the Nephilim have free will?
Right, but that's like applying eugenics to the Nephilim.
Well, but when you read about why the Nephilim were condemned, like in the Book of Enoch, like Nephilim were known to rampage over the earth and
sure, because they lived in a time that might makes right, and they were the biggest, baddest dudes on the Pecos. Like, I mean,
might always makes right.
Right, which is why we can't have big giant dudes that are supernaturally empowered, right? But again, that just makes it sound to me. I'm conjuring more of a situation of like a baby Huey type environment, right?
Well,
versus this evil incarnation
and the rabbits,
right? And I will hug him and squeeze him and call him George.
I think that's a worthwhile discussion to have, but I'll leave it at this. In the Bible, they are pictured as evil. They're understood as a plague upon the earth. They're demonic figures. Joshua wiping them out is seen as a classic struggle of good versus evil, and Rephaim came to mean a demonic creature. And the demons in the New Testament that Jesus drove out, as the Book of Enoch explains them, demons aren't necessarily just evil spirits. They're the demons of the kind that they're talking about. They're called unclean spirits because they're the illicit mixing of two natures, and because Nephilim they're fathered by spirit beings but mothered by physical beings.
Yeah.
They belong to the earth, so they don't like.
I get that they're not supposed to be, right? And I get that, like I said, and I do want to get into this because I don't know that it really matters that much, because this is one of those this isn't, it doesn't matter to be saved or not saved or to be a Christian or not around this concept. But it's just weird. I've seen so many people, and oh, by the way, I can't put a period on this sentence without pointing out how many times, as we've gotten deeper into this conversation, you're continuing to reference the Book of Enoch. I just want to make that point.
Well,
I'm just putting a pin in that for future conversation, because we will come back to that.
So should I?
We can't get into it now. We're already 2 hours into this thing.
I think it's been crazy that we I keep seeing spots where we could really wrap this and go, and then like another thing pops up. I think for the future we're gonna be like abrupt, like time up, done.
Just to wrap up my last point. The Nephilim are presented as evil in the Old Testament. They're demons in human flesh, and they're seen as a source of evil.
I disagree with that.
What?
They're not. Where in the Old Testament are they presented that way? They're only referenced in one sentence in Genesis 6.
The Rephaim, the giants that Joshua killed.
Where's the direct language that says they're Nephilim?
The Rephaim,
I'm pretty sure that's inferred. And I'm not. I'm trying to be clinical here.
We'll talk about this. How do we put a bow on today?
I don't.
Fellas?
Well, but the point is the way that it's framed in the Bible.
No!
Acts chapter 2, when they spoke in other tongues, and the Spirit of God descended upon them like fire from heaven, and by invoking the name of Jesus, they spoke in other tongues. This is a reversal of the Tower of Babel, where he confused their language. Now they can speak in the languages of other nations, so they can go out and reclaim the nations. But this is done by God putting his nature in us. And that's the whole thrust of the Christian life, is that we've been given the divine nature, and we are to make every effort to participate in it. It's often presented as a passive thing, when no, we're supposed to make every effort to strive to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. And it's predicated on that concept. But anyway.
So yeah, I was shouting no, and then you were putting a really good bow, and then your bow just had
unraveled
much ribbon. There was so much ribbon on your bow. It just tied that thing. I mean, it's a Disneyland-sized tree in downtown.
I would say that that is the most important individual takeaway from
I agree.
Worldview.
I agree. That's why I gave you props, and then you kept. That's all right.
I would have been done like way earlier if not for. I blame you guys. I love you too, but I blame you guys.
But Matt, you got anything?
Nah, I think we're good. I don't think I can say another full sentence without causing more ribbon to appear on top of the bow. So
I think you might be right.
Go at it. I mean,